Hi everybody. As a start, I will read one poem in French and then Elisa will continue in English so that you can hear the language. It starts with a verse from Tristan Tzara. You know Tristan Tzara? Homme un peu animal, un peu fleur, un peu métal, un peu homme. Tristan Tzara, l'homme approximatif. Il y a sur nos têtes une ombre verticale qui vibre. Une ombre qui claque sur nos têtes, un sifflement clandestin dans la plaine aride sur nos têtes encombrées. Et pendant que ça siffle, que rien ne prévoit que ça siffle, que nos crânes bourdonnent, c'est un toit en béton qui accueille nos humeurs, nos flancs téméraires, sur la plateforme de fortune, la constellation larguée dans le brouillard des sens. Tu n'as pas abandonné l'épave poussiéreuse. Des ombres verticales courent à lisière de dunes. Tes yeux emmaillotés derrière la glace concave, protection anti-UV non garantie. Des touches noires à lisière de dunes, un solfège sans bruit. Tu n'as pas abandonné l'épave poussiéreuse. Une ombre verticale plantée dans la plaine aride que tu irrigues de promesses, l'organe métallique qui vibre à lisière de poumons sur la plateforme de béton où les musiques s'entrechoquent, protection non garantie pour un totem de fortune.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you for being here this afternoon, evening, I don't know how to call it. Yeah, it's 6, so it's evening. Now, it's a very special occasion for you to be able to listen to Samira Negrouche, who's a poet, translator, and a friend from Algiers. And we met now many years ago, been in touch and read together, and I really like her work, but I also like her attitude and the way she talks about poetry and the political side of poetry and all that. So I asked her to start with a poem in French. She writes in French so that you can get a sense of the music of her language right away, even if you didn't get the content, most of you at least. I'm sure some of you speak French. And then afterwards, majority of the reading obviously will be in English, so do not worry, you also get the imagery and all that. But I strongly believe that it could be also a fascinating experience not to understand what goes on, but just being taken by the music, again, of the language. So we have decided together that first I will ask her a bunch of questions so that you can get to know her. Then she'll read some of her poems in English, and then we'll ask questions. So that please feel free. This is supposed to be a very open and friendly environment. Don't feel intimidated and do ask questions. I created this event for you, so that's why you should take advantage of the situation. So I want to start with something interesting because it's not that unusual, but it's a bit unusual. Majority of the poets I know, they usually work, they're professors or teachers or work in a publishing house. You're a medical doctor, so how come and how much, that's personal history, no, but how much that influences your writing? Is there a connection between the two? Does it help to have a different gaze toward language and certain issues, like the body, for example? Yes or no?
Yeah. For many years, I didn't like these questions, especially when I still was a student or a medical doctor, a young medical doctor, and a poet in the same time. Because, people have this idea, so you curate with your job and you curate with poetry, which was, of course, the first level of things. And poetry is about digesting the whole thing, the language, but also the life experience. And it's amazing you are asking this question because I met a group of surgeons a few months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago by accident. We were stuck in Barcelona airport and we spent all the night together and they were fascinated by the fact that everyone wants to be a medical doctor and have a good salary, and that I clearly decided, it took me years, but I clearly decided that I would stop working as medical doctor and only work on writing projects, which doesn't mean I only write from the morning till the evening. I do a lot of things. And the professor of the group organizes a conference every year, and he said, Samira, why wouldn't you come and tell the other doctors what's the process of becoming a poet from being a doctor? And I found this interesting, so I'm preparing this conference. It will be in the end of the month, of what it is different of being a poet who studied as a medical doctor. But I mean, I find it interesting now, 20 years after, that I digested this experience, and especially that I was trained in a period in Algeria where, as a young student, we had to face the late part of terrorism, which, you know, hospitals are like the nerves of a city. You face humanity in all what it is, in its fragilities, in its absolute parts. So we had to face this. I remember I started in 1997. The first year I went to medical school. In the summer, our library was burned. So we started the year with this idea that it wasn't that simple even to study medicine. And then we started to go to work in the hospital. We were partly in the university and the other part in the hospital, starting the practice. And then we had not only military guys, but also civilians having issues from the bombs, terrorist attacks, and then we had to face two other huge events in the capital, in Algiers, an earthquake and inondation, flood. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's only three, important and maybe traumas that I remembered while preparing this conference. That, okay, I was trained as a medical doctor, and it says a lot about the structure of how I work, but also I did it in this country, in that specific period, that made me aware of the fragility of our situation as citizens, as human beings surrounded by violence, as human beings surrounded by the corruption of the political situation, the extremism, all parts of extremism, which is not only the religious extremism, but also the military extremism. And I think the question was, how could I not become a poet? I mean, I was writing poetry at 8. Most of my friends who were writing poetry stopped writing poetry. But because I had to face it, all these extremes, all this sensitive part, and because also literature was not only a protection at that time. Maybe I have to tell you a detail about that period, is that we weren't allowed after a certain time to go outside. Like when I was your age, I wouldn't go to a cafe or a theater or cinema or any music concert after. I had this great opportunity to have a grandfather who bought a bookshop in 1961, and so the house became a little library, and I survived all these years reading. I started to read very early. I spent the whole all of my time reading. So, and this is also how I started translating, because we didn't have the books we needed in Arabic, so I needed all the time to translate from French into Arabic to prepare my articles for school. Yeah, so I think all these little details maybe explain why I skipped from medicine. The best way for me to be a medical doctor nowadays maybe is to be a poet, not to curate, but to maybe to give a room to this, I think, very important experience we survived in the 90s and even till today, even if it's not as violent as in the 90s, but it's still
complicated.
I think it was a rich experience. It's a trauma, but it's a very rich experience, and I couldn't just keep it in silence and continue being a medical doctor and buy a house and a beautiful car. I think at some point it wasn't possible for me to write only on Sundays. Actually, in my country it's Friday, but yeah.
It was an ethical choice.
Yeah, in the beginning it was an instinct. Then I thought it was only because in my country I didn't have the high standards of literature I wanted to have, so I needed to travel and to accept the invitations, and this all happened also because I started to get invitations all around. I was maybe lucky in that, so I could make the decision after many years because I had that. But now thinking of it for this conference in September, I realize it's much more complex, and that finally it was the only thing I could do. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned books, so I want to ask you about tradition, meaning it's not that easy, right? Because you come from a Kabyle family, so probably use the Kabyle dialect, or at least for certain words in the family. But then you were, all your schooling took place in French, as far as I know, at least a generation.
Yeah.
But now in the country, most of the people speak Arabic.
Yeah.
So, and this is always the complicated issue of not just simply choosing the language that you prefer. It's more connected with a personal history, but French is the language of the colonizer. So French is the language of the people who've been, torturing you and oppressing you. Mm-hmm. But there is a strong cultural tradition behind it, so you cannot avoid it. So how do you play with that? It's not easy, I assume, but
yeah.
How do you deal with that?
But do you understand what it means, the Kabyle or the Berber identity?
Please.
Yes.
Tell them briefly.
Yes, very briefly, because it's very complex.
I imagine.
We use different words. The Berber name for this part of the world is Tamazra. The language is Tamazight, and the people are called Imaziren. Like if you say Italian, French, American, you would say Imaziren. The language is Tamazight and the land is Tamazra. It's a very old culture. Some researchers would say it's from 20,000 years. This language exists in this part of the world since, many, many years, at least 5,000 or 6,000 years. And we have proofs of this language in the desert, of course, in some part of the northern sub-Saharan countries, black countries, like Mali, Niger, in the north of Senegal. Of course, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia are the most Berber-speaking countries. Morocco has 35 or 40% of Berber-speaking people, and it's a very old language. It's a native language. Arabic came to this land only through the Islamic conquests. So it is also a foreign language, but as it exists in the land since many, many years, it became, of course, Algerian. Like if you would make the comparison, you would tell about Brazil, who's speaking Portuguese. or the Latin American countries. North Africa speaks Arabic only since a few centuries, and some researchers even say that the Arabic language and even the religion became more strong from the time of colonization, because people wanted to address the colonizer as with one identity, because it was difficult to be Algerian and to face the French colonization without being one. And it started a dialogue between different factions at that time concerning the Amazigh question. So the leaders struggled, and it was difficult at that time to accept that we could be multiple and address the colonizer. So for many years, we were only Muslim and Arab, which is not completely true, and then had been a little bit manipulated by politics after the independence. So the Berber is a very old culture, which doesn't mean we are not from Arab heritage, because I am from this Berber family. My two sides, like my mother family and my father family, only speak Berber at home, and we do that because we don't want to lose our language. The language says a lot about what
identity,
about your identity, about several things. But I speak Arabic in the street. I speak Algerian Arabic in the street. When I meet writers from the Middle East, it's very difficult for me because I speak with them
Algerian Arabic, because then
they don't understand
Arabic.
Algerian Arabic.
Exactly,
that's
because
the
Egyptian
thing.
Arabic,
Yeah.
and then there is the Middle East Arabic.
We understand Lebanese and Egyptian. They don't understand Algerian and Moroccan because it's a mix. It's a mix of Algerian, Berber, sometimes few words in French, sometimes few words in Italian or in Spanish, and it always have been like that. If you read researchers of linguistics, you would find that, especially in the big cities like Algiers, Bijaya, Annaba, we always had a mix of languages. So it's not new that my country is multilingual. We used to speak 4, 5, 6 languages. We used to be a commercial country. At some periods, we were the country from where the products from Africa would travel to Europe. What changed the situation is maybe first of it the colonization and the manipulation of identity. You know, this thing that the French army used, séparer pour mieux régner. Like you separate communities, you tell them that they are not the same people to make them
weak. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is what happened, for example, with the Jewish community in North Africa, especially in Algeria. In Morocco they stayed, but in Algeria it has been manipulated, and also the Christianity has been manipulated. So after '62, which was the year of our independence, not only those we called les pieds noirs left, but also the Jewish communities and also the Christian communities, which were very old in the land. I mean, the Jewish community is from 2,000 years. I have friends who live now in Europe. They told me in that before they left the country, they used to say the prayer of the Pesach in Berber. I mean, when I realized this, that you realize there is part of your memory that has been taken.
Absolutely.
So the question is not why do you write in French, the question is why do we miss all these parts? Because revolution is a good thing, but you know that with every revolution you lose something, and sometimes you lose your soul, and you need a lot of time if you really want to do it to recover parts of your memory.
You never wrote in Berber or in Arabic?
I never wrote in Berber or in Arabic.
Never came natural to you.
And it's a very, it's a question I am very often addressed in France, because they want us to be the Algerian writer who decided to write in the French language because we would be more modern than those who write in Arabic, which would be, of course, too cliché. I mean, when I started to write in French, I wasn't in an age to be aware of these political issues. I was really speaking Berber at home, Arabic outside.
And French in school?
And French not in the start.
Ah, okay.
I studied until the baccalaureate, which is 16, 17 years old, and then I studied medicine in French. But at that time, as I told you, I started to read and to translate, because at that time we had the 90s, so the years of terrorism, and a few years before, when the social crisis started in the country. So in libraries, you wouldn't find books that you would need for your studies. Because in Algeria, they decided in the middle of the 70s to turn the studies from French into Arabic. So for example, my uncles and aunts, who are only 10 or 15 years older than me, they studied everything in French. And suddenly, they decided only for political reasons. The problem finally is it's how the ideology and politics make violent decisions. I mean, it didn't take them a process, but they decided that, okay, now stop it with French, and we will turn all the studies into Arabic. What was a tragedy for many young people, because they couldn't from a day to another become Arab speaking, especially in the big cities where everyday's life were going in French, and the signs and everything. I mean, you cannot change a whole functioning from a day to another. So this is what happened in the country. That.
But you still feel the fracture in a sense, because when I was there talking with your friend who's in her 60s, 70s, she knew few words of Arabic. So it's interesting. Someone was born and raised in Algiers, and then it was this young artist who were in their mid-20s who knew the opposite, few words of French. It was very interesting. They come from the same country, it's the same country,
and
but under different political conditions. Therefore, the culture.
And you know what they told me, because the two young artists are from a city in the east, very close to Tunisia. And Tunisia is known in the three countries of the Maghreb to be the most Arab-speaking country. The colonization in Tunisia haven't been that violent, so they still had a settled country and state. So they were very close to Egypt, and they are very good in Arabic. So eastern cities in Algeria are very close to Tunisia, and they speak a very good Arabic. And those two artists told me they were very surprised how young people and, let's say, educated people would speak French between them to each other. Like normally, for them it wouldn't be acceptable. Like
so even within the same country, you have
in the
such
same
strong
country,
differences.
it's very different, and it is not a question of being from a rich family or not. Maybe now it is changing, because from the, I would say the 10, 15 last years, Algeria started to see a very huge corruption. And you know that the prices of oil went very high in the beginning of the years 2000. And we had a new nomenclatura of, you know, like in Russia, when after the collapse in Russia, when some oligarchs started to have a lot of money, and it's not a money of honest work. It's really the corruption. We have never seen corruption like this. We always had corruption. I mean, we are in Africa.
Also here.
Yeah, also in Italy, in Spain, everywhere. But corruption has changed the face of the country. Because in very few years, you would, the education, for example, in Algeria, we never had private schools. It started very quickly that people would settle private schools without any control from the state. You are never sure of the quality of the studies, and it all goes with the collapse of the country in the 90s. So the collapse maybe is much more interesting now to study than in the 90s, because in the 90s you would still have structured people from the older generations that would that have finally gave some stability to the country. But now we are living the effects of the destruction of the 90s. So
it's very complicated.
It's very complicated, yeah.
To at least know what's going on.
And you know what? Sometimes I feel very sad because I see all the changes that are going in this country, and I am afraid of the labelization of parts of the society. I have the feeling that the experiences we have lived that could be very useful and interesting for at least the countries around us are disappearing because there isn't enough researchers about it, not enough testimonies, and the trauma is still ongoing trauma. So people just go ahead and forget about it. Like, we are the only country in the Maghreb where the Francophone scene is not from a certain class of society. Like, if you go to Morocco or to Tunisia, it would be only upper class. In Algeria, we were born from a revolution, so everyone was destroyed in 1962. And when you were from a rich family in that period, you would only have land. I mean, my family has huge land in the mountains, but it doesn't cost anything. It's only our heritage, which is a lot. But it's just to say that we started this country with a big hope to build a new democracy, to build with a sense of pride, finally. And this has been quickly destroyed by the conflicts between the political fractions. And then the terrorism arrived. And this has destroyed also many things in the country. Do you know Assia Djibar?
I do, but just
Who knows Assia Djibar? Assia Djibar is one of our most important novelists. She was the only writer from the Maghreb who was elected in the French Academy. And I'm giving her example because she is from this generation of Algerian writers who were Francophone, who were the fathers and the mothers of Algerian modern literature. Most of them were part of the nationalist movement for the independence of the country, but quickly after the independence, for some reason, they have been fired from the country. Like Assia Djibar, who was a professor of history, couldn't teach in her country because the first faculty who has been turned from French into Arabic as a symbol was the Faculty of History. So our intellectuals who could build the country have been fired from the country. So this is one of the reasons. But we still now have new generations of Francophones, because I was raised in my country. I have been educated in my country in French. And when people try to attack me, not for literary reasons, but for political reasons, they would say, why do you write in French? And they know that I am Algerian and have been educated in French in my country. I mean, how can you educate me in a language and don't let me think in this language? And in another hand, I write in French, yes, but I write in Algerian French. And as a joke, I always ask my translators to add as a note, translated from Algerian French. Yeah, which doesn't mean I have a problem with French. It's just that the day you are proud of your history and say, okay, we have been raped by these people. It's a rape. Yeah. But the result of the rape is a DNA. And DNA of my country is also French.
Absolutely.
So,
and a lot of very important, think about Camus, think about Derrida, very important French-speaking intellectuals are from Algeria, because there's something that at times the French kind of forget. And I mean, they know but tend to forget.
Exactly, and we need that, contradiction. We need those people, those intellectuals who fought for our identity, who were part of our identity. I mean, Derrida or Hélène Cixous or Albert Camus. These are all part of Algerian heritage.
So, this is something that is not said that often, right? You associate them with France, period, not Algeria.
I mean, simplifying a situation is always killing parts of yourself. And this is all what dictatorial countries do. They try to simplify things, they try to delete large parts of your history, and finally take the power of this multiculturalism from you.
Resource but this is a strength.
This doesn't work anymore. I think people are starting to wake up, and they are aware now that it's much more complex. And of course, when you are born outside the country, you feel fragile. But as in my case, my family is from the mountains since 1,000 years. So
you have your roots.
I have my roots. No one can come and say, come on, you are a foreigner. Yeah. And I find it dangerous, even if you came 10 years ago, to be addressed as a foreigner. It's dangerous. Yeah.
I do have a couple more questions, but I want to now, since now we have a little background about her and her roots and her history, and a lot of, and some of the writers here about that. Perhaps you want to read, you do your reading, and afterwards we can ask questions, and perhaps Annie can ask you a couple more things.
You wanted me to read in English?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, I do.
I have never done this.
No.
I did never read in English, never.
I told you we're going to read in English.
Huh?
I told you. Go ahead.
Really? Okay. You forgive me if my English is... I never studied English in school. Only maybe for 3 years in high school. So it's only from poetry that I read and write English.
Okay. So that'd be Algerian English. Go.
Algerian English.
That's your version.
So this has been translated by Marilyn Hacker, an American poet who lives partly in Paris and partly in the US. This is part of a book that will come out, I hope, next year, by the end of 2019. This part is called 6 Makeshift Trees Around My Bathtube. Above our heads, a vertical shadow vibrates, a shadow that flaps above our heads, a clandestine whistling on the arid plain above our overloaded heads. And while there is that whistling, that whistling and anticipated, as our buzzing skulls, a cement roof accommodates our moods on the makeshift platform, the constellation set adrift in the fog of the senses. You have not abandoned the dusty wreckage. Vertical shadows race at the dune's edge, your eyes bandaged behind the concave ice, anti-UV protection not guaranteed. A piano's black keys at the dune's edge, a scale that makes no sound. You have not abandoned the dusty wreckage, a vertical shadow planted on the arid plain, that you water with promises, the metallic organ that vibrates at the edge of a lung on the cement platform where the musics clash, protection not guaranteed for a makeshift totem. In the rock garden, a mute man dances. We don't know what funeral oration. They say a deaf man sows steps of abundance and solar circles. He was not born to hear the world exploding. Is there a place washed up on a forgotten ridge where the news wouldn't arrive, where the news wouldn't be implied, where the news wouldn't be felt? Is there a breach in time that isn't waiting to fix our gaze on suffocated screens? Are there eyes in this world, ears in this world, that were born to welcome into their souls obscenity, 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 and turn away and not turn away? What I like about Jesus are his faded feet and those of his companions, 13 halos, on the abundant icons of the small Bulgarian Mount Athos. I'm not talking about the fig tree Jesus illuminates, nor of a cascade of rocks, more like the Grand Canyon than Galilee. Jesus' delicately faded feet made me think of the rock paintings of Tassili. There is no foot as finely traced on Hogarth's boulders. They are long, slender figures, suspended exactly like the Christ, suspended, fixed, and dynamic at once. It's a lightning bolt, an illusion stripped of logic, or so it seems. You find what you find, above all when it's different from that you see. What I like about the astrophysicist are his premonitions when he says, perhaps, when he says that statistics have altered physics, fixed it in place, emptied, disembodied, when he says that matter isn't matter, that time and space are heresy, that we humans take ourselves too seriously, thinking ourselves fragile, inventing ourselves powerful, that we invent landmarks, that we forget having invented them, that we must relinquish control, when he says, perhaps, give your doubt back, it's all. It seems unlikely to me that a key word would open anything, whatever worth the bother. Words don't open anything. Actually, function paralyzes words. I acknowledge the statistic paralyzes all the software by saturation. A cuneiform language lies in the branches of a sacred wood. It holds no secret that can be translated to sound. It is not the virtual transposition of any narcissism, barely a dream, a geographical arrangement of what we call life. There are trees in my head, around my bath tube, because the universe is much too large, far from my puddle of water. Thank you.
You did it. Wow, you're shocked by the
How was my first reading in English? Good, thank you. If anyone is interested to have it, you can send them. There is no problem.
Yeah,
You
I
can
have
send them
Just
the whole 6 poems.
ask me.
Yeah.
Questions, please.
Please.
How did it feel to you, like reading your poem in English? Like, do you feel like it sort of changed at all in your reading?
It changes a lot. Yeah.
Can you just like expand on that?
Marilyn Hacker is very special. I never ask her any questions. Sometimes I reread the translations, and when I have a question, most of the time only 1 or 2, in a very shy way, I ask her the question because she's a so respected poet and translator. What I like about her work is that she respects the poem, but also she recreates it in English. I mean, my level of English isn't as good as to directly write in English. I mean, sometimes I do. When I prepare lectures, I write in English, but there you see the difference between a poet, a good poet who translates poetry. You see it quite directly. I mean, I have, for example, not this poem, but Café sans sucre has been translated by 3 different translators. One of them was British. He wasn't a poet at all. So the sense was there, but you wouldn't find any music in it. And our work as poets is also to bring the music inside. Not the music of rhymes or verses, but an internal music. And I will maybe go back a few seconds to the question of languages, because I am from this multilingual background. Of course, there are different musics in my French because of that. Like the Gnawa music, for example. Did you hear about this music? It's music from the desert. I have a friend who is from Biskra, who is a researcher in this music, and he told me that when he started to study the text, the poetry of this Gnawa music, he realized that it's not only Arabic and Berber, it's only a mix of several African dialects. And this adds a lot to your ears. And we write with images, we write with words, but we also write with our ears, with our inner geography, with our inner music.
And the choices you make in French, clearly one word instead of another, come from something that resounds within yourself.
Yeah.
Because of those languages. So this is very important.
Yeah, it's important. It was the first time I was reading any of the translations in English. Most of the time I only print them and read them and discuss with the translator who wants to discuss it. But what I liked a lot in the comparison between the British guy who was a professional translator, Marilyn Hacker, and then another poet called Anna Moskovakis, is that really you see what the poet is looking for in your poetry. Because when Anna started to translate Café sans sucre, she called it flat white. You would find this in internet. It was published by Bomb magazine as a collaboration between both of us. And she said, Samira, when I read this poem, I want to write inside your poem. So that was the thing. She translated it, and she called it corrupted translation, because she wanted to be free in translating the poem, and maybe she was interested in things for her own work. It ended up in her book. Her last book of poetry started like this 40 poems, my 20 poems translated, the 20 poems she wrote as a dialogue with mine, and this whole thing started the book. But what Marilyn does is something completely different, because she lives now in Paris since several years. She knows Algerian literature, which is very important, because as you said, some words, some choices are specifically what they are because of a context, and even not many French people understand it, even those who live with Algerian or people from the Maghreb, because it's very subtle. And having someone who is really interested to understand from where this came and the whole process of Algerian literature in from maybe the 20s, because the first poet you would call as an Algerian established poet writing in French would be Jean Amrouche. So we go back to the 1920. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
You mentioned that there are enough testimonies, and I'm guessing that you write in order to provide another testimony. However, most historians wouldn't actually consider a testimony or a testimonial piece to be art. I guess my question is, what's your opinion about the relationship between art and testimony?
As I told you earlier about medicine, I believe we are not journalists. Time is very important. We need to digest everything. And I know it very well because I'm from a country where we had too much political literature, especially in the 50s and after and after and after. We have been imprisoned in this political literature, which finally was another violence. So you have to be aware and to take the time. People nowadays forget about the importance of taking time. They think they can find their friends everywhere with the mobile phones now. But the reality is that nothing happens without the distance, without digesting events. And yes, I find it very interesting in some writings to use documentation, to use history, to research. As poets, I see us as researchers, maybe also because I was trained as a medical doctor. I always say that I'm a poet because I couldn't be a researcher in immunology, for example, because we don't have modern laboratories. I would have to leave the country and to research in another country, but I wanted to stay in my country and be a researcher, so I decided to become a poet. This is half a joke. So yes, I'm really sensitive to these questions, the questions of our multiple identity, of our multiple languages. For example, the place of women during the war. How did they disappear? I mean, when you go to families, in every family they would tell you about a sister or a daughter who has been tortured and raped and killed by the French army. But most of the names that are given to the streets and the high schools and universities and airports are men. Why did they disappear? Like, it's the same thing for many, many, many other subjects. Also during the terrorism, the dialogue isn't open yet because it's still fresh and it's still complex. But yeah, I think it's only the process. Your living process that would give you the way to how you can maybe use this subject or this or this research or this other thing. Like, what would be dangerous is to start with the idea of like a Superman or a Superwoman. Like, okay, I will
Solve.
I
Give
will,
answers.
I will
right?
give answers. We have to respect the tragedy. And part of respecting the tragedy is to give it the time it needs to digest. And it's also your honesty with yourself. It doesn't matter what the other people think. If you feel that you did the process and it's time for you to use what you researched and what you are touched by, then you can use it and try it, because you are in a laboratory, so you can do whatever. Yeah, you can experiment it.
But it's very important to. It doesn't mean to be detached from something, but to have a clear vision. If you are still, surrounded and inside emotions, sometimes your vision is not clear. And as a writer, as an intellectual, I speak from this point of view, you have responsibilities. So it's not about how you feel, but you have to give voice. That don't have voice. Therefore, that distance helps you to find the right do that, the right perspective.
And sometimes you see the difference with writers who are mainly journalists. They quickly want to write about something. Like a bomb happened, less than 1 year after they want to write a novel about it.
That's also needed, but something different.
That's also needed, but
It's
it's different.
Clearly.
As a poet, I feel I need much more time. And I see things differently when time passes. And what it brings is as needed as the one who would write a novel after 1 year.
In your poem, you speak of the vertical shadow, l'ombre verticale. I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit more about the symbolism you were using there for, I guess, what I'm assuming would have been something that happened in the Algerian society. I don't want to assume, so I want you to tell me.
Yeah. I am using an electricity post as a metaphor, because it's this modern violent world coming quite too quickly in an ecosystem, but then it plays with the violence of the authority. The authority which came from the colonial system, like the image of the parachutist, the vertical parachutist who would be the authority, and then this authority that turned to become finally the dictatorial authority in the country. And when I say about you didn't left the, tu n'as pas abandonné l'épave poussiéreuse. Yeah, you have not abandoned the dusty wreckage. Of course, it's about the 90s. Like, why would you stay there? And I also use this metaphor. I didn't read the 6 poems, but maybe if you have time to read it more slowly, you would understand. But I also use the metaphor of the desertic parts, a desertic land as a climate, but also as a country who has been finally deserted by his intellectuals, because part of them were killed and a large part have left the country. So why didn't you abandon this desertic land? Yeah, it's all about the desert and the modernity. What I told you earlier is that I was afraid of the memories that are lost. Because we in our modern history, which is very short, finally, 60 years is nothing in the history of a country, but the richness of this that is disappearing also, because when a country is traumatized, it is deserted by the people who can save it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about your work with visual artists and sort of the themes you deal with that.
I didn't...
What the themes are and what you feel that visual art adds to your poetry, or what your poetry adds to visual art that lets it say something that it wouldn't say alone.
Oh yeah, we did a project together. we had this reading in Algiers, and both of us presented installations. I mean, every time I travel somewhere, I need to go to museums, especially modern art museums, because I find it interesting, maybe as a translator, to see how other artists in their field deal with the world and the way they build our process. I'm really interested by that. So I work a lot with visual artists and musicians. If I simplify this, is that I try to translate the way they live in our modern society. Like with Ali Silem, for example, who is an Algerian artist who left the country in 91, I think. It was a dialogue that finally needed to arrive between the older generation who left the country and us. So I wrote a ritual poem, and he drew, how do you say, un bâton? Comment tu traduis un bâton? Il est où le Québécois? Il est parti?
A
stick, which is symbolic in traditional societies. He drew a stick, and I wrote circles of a ritual, finally a funeral ritual to those who left the country or who have been killed. But then I also work with artists who are from a very different background, such as Yves Sussman, whose work is really inspiring. Like, for example, she did this film, White on White. She filmed 5,000 hours in Eastern Europe, and she built a logarithm that makes you discover a different film every time you enter the room. It's never the same film, because the logarithm would choose white, bird, car, and it will never be the same film. And I like the way she used modern technology to create her new art. She works a lot about surveillance also, how we live in societies where cameras and checkpoints are so present. So I think that sometimes you meet artists who work in the same subjects, or maybe who questions the same subjects, and the way they process it is really inspiring. So I find it very, very important to see what is happening in the modern art scene, be it choreography or music or dance or whatever, theater, visual arts.
Can I ask my question in French? I think not, right? So I just want to know, like, what do you like most about expressing yourself in French? What do you like most about the language?
The answer is
maybe it's a neutral language. Maybe. It's very bizarre to say this,
exactly, yeah,
because it's a colonial language. But after the independence, it became the language of resistance. And also it became the language of sciences, because all the other faculties became Arab-speaking faculties, like history, social studies, which is not naive. You would understand why the thinking part is in Arabic without the elite to teach the social studies, because someone who would read, who would study sociology in Arabic wouldn't completely understand Derrida, because before he personally decides to go to Derrida or to someone else. So you see why the choice of changing the language in social studies. But in scientific studies like mathematics, biology, medicine, pharmacy, all of it is in French. So we have two brains in the country. The scientific brain is in French, and the literary, social, and intellectual part is in Arabic. So maybe because I am from that scientific part, and I happened as an accident to be a poet, I use a quite neutral language.
Earlier on, you were talking about the music of the words, and you write in French.
Yeah.
Now, the sound of words is very important for Islamic theology.
Yes.
In Arabic, but you write in French.
Yes.
And you're interested in the music of your French.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you, do you carry Islamic spirituality into the music of your French?
Not only. Yes, not only. I carry this and many other things. I am from a very old village, from a part of the mountains that is called the Marabout. 5 kilometers from my village, we have one of the oldest Islamic schools in North Africa, which is from the 11th century. We call it Kayeverken. And my part of the village is the part that is from the Marabout who came from the south of Morocco. So of course it's part of my heritage, and maybe I will read you something only in French.
Yes.
So maybe you can hear something, and you tell me. Do you understand French? A little bit. Okay. Saint homme des vallées fertiles, des colonnes sculptées, du luth ouvragé. Ils habitent ta demeure et se réclament de tes sagesses. Ils feignent le patrimoine et n'en goûtent que les épices colorées. Ils embrassent ton mausolée, lisent tes vers et consentent à l'offrande. Ils ont le port droit et parlent de dignité. Ils parlent en fraternité et se réclament des dieux. Saint homme des vallées fertiles, saint homme des vallées fertiles, les âmes ont quitté l'ombre du mur et jailli comme un. On a arrêté leurs ombres croissantes et elles sont restées un. On a brisé leurs cils et étouffé leurs regards, elles sont restées un. L'un qui persiste et avance et parle enfin et divulgue l'imposture. Sur tes terres et sur la terre de l'un saint homme, les frères sont venus des 4 lieux de l'ancien royaume, du Maghreb, du Mashriq et du Hijaz. Ils sont venus les frères qui embrassent tes sagesses, et sur le seuil de ta porte ils ont fermé les fenêtres de leurs cils, et dans l'antre de l'un ils ont voilé leur sens et parlé au nom du Fils. Saint homme des vallées fertiles, dans le cœur de ta sagesse, un vélo avance et les hauteurs ne sont plus que des terrains de tir. This was called Damascus.
So, body language, you're reading that.
You know, it's about Ibn Arabi and the mystic thing about les fenêtres de leurs cils. I don't know how we translate this.
That's complicated.
Yeah.
All right.
You can find it online. It is called 7 Little Jasmine Monologues, and it has been published by Arab Lit. It's also translated by Marilyn Hacker.
All right then, so I want to thank you, Samira Negrouche,
Thank
for
you.
sharing her